estimates. Senator Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Look, thanks, Mr Davies. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question about your initiatives list, because I think you said in your answer to one of my questions that your initiatives list was mode neutral. Could you just expand on the initiatives list as opposed to the projects?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Perhaps it'd be useful if I quickly give you an overview of how we developed it. So, when we did the 2015 audit, we went around the country and looked at largely population growth. Where's the growth going to be? How are the existing systems set up for growth? And where are some of the future challenges going to be over the next 15 or so years? Through that, we did some modelling, particularly that looked at capital cities in terms of how those cities were going to grow and where the corridors were going to be that were going to be under pressure. And from that generated a list of problems. We then engaged with state and territory governments around that to say, does this accord with how you see the future planning for your capital city? And then from that, identified a number of corridors where this growth was going to be a problem. So initiatives came out of that process where we said this corridor in Perth, for example, is going to be under pressure over this time period. We need to think about what our options are for responding to that growth. And most of it was driven by congestion. If you remember, Senator, we estimated that without further investment, we'd see a cost of congestion of $53 billion by 2031. So that was the first point of engagement. And then since that period over the last 3 years, we've got into another level of detail with most state and territory governments around, what they're thinking about in terms of a suite of responses to that problem. So it's often more than one project. It can be a whole series of projects, and we're working with a number of state and territory governments in supporting them. They're thinking around how they develop those responses, and then ultimately they'll come through in business cases. So that just explains the process. So this is still the baseline document that has a combination of problems, partially developed solutions, and then full project solutions.
So how do you see your Future Cities report then, and that recommendation of prioritising public transport influencing what's on that initiatives list?
So I see that as being a very significant opportunity to influence a number of things. One that we get better at long-term planning and actually thinking about where we're creating jobs and where people are going to live, and that we actually make that the basis for then our infrastructure planning. And two, that we think more sophisticatedly about our infrastructure planning, and particularly the transport system. How is the transport system going to respond to growth? And what small investments, large investments do we need to make? How do we get better use out of our existing transport system? And then to further develop then some of the new investments that we need to make, whether they be signal upgrading or building a new rail line or whatever it might be.
So would you see that recommendation of increasing the priority for public transport and the recognition that's in this report that the most effective way of tackling urban congestion is to prioritise public transport? In fact, there's a pretty clear statement in the report that just by building new roads you're not going to be able to deal with congestion. So would you see that should mean then that you would have a priority for public transport projects on your initiatives list?
I would see more public transport projects coming through, responding to that growth. And that's absolutely what we need to keep people moving and provide the levels of transport service that people need to live in our cities.
So those findings should influence what's on the initiatives list.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at the moment for Melbourne, the list of projects that are on the initiatives list to deal with urban congestion are incredibly dominated by road projects. There are 7 projects that are listed there as initiatives, with 2 of them which are rail projects, the Cranbourne-Pakenham rail line upgrade and the Melbourne Metro Rail, which is now under construction. All the rest are very, very substantial road projects. So would you see that list changing?
I think we'll continue to see investment in roads, and we need that, and public transport. But I think it goes through waves of investment, Senator, in terms of, if we look back at history, some states have invested more in public transport through a period and then more in roads and so on and so forth. I think we'll expect to see both coming through, but essentially...
But we've currently got a dominance, absolute dominance of road projects on that initiative list for Melbourne. And I said $56 billion worth of projects compared with 2 approximately on what's currently known for the mix of both the priorities and the initiatives.
But
I mean, here on the list you've got the connectivity between Eastern Freeway and the Melbourne CBD. That's the East-West link, which is a $22 billion project when it was last costed.
So that's really a matter for the Victorian government, Senator. But the Victorian government is also investing in Melbourne Metro Tunnel and various rail line upgrades. Their 50 plus 52 level crossing program removal.
That's a road project, the level crossing removal.
So
don't tag that as a public transport project. It's to improve flow.
Can I just make an observation? We've spent a lot of time on this, and your view is been very well expressed. But we are bordering on getting into a debate as to whether this should look different to what it is.
It's a very.
It is what it is, and I really do think you need to direct your questions to illuminate what it is, rather than necessarily spending a lot of time debating with.
I've got a very
Mr. Davies.
clear question, which is if, with a recommendation of prioritising public transport, would Infrastructure Australia expect that would flow through so that you had a priority for public transport projects in your infrastructure, in your initiatives list?
We'd like to see more public transport projects coming through to the list.
Yes, and so you would expect to see a change then to that mix of projects that's currently on your list?
At any point in time, I think we do see a mix, and we'd expect to see more public transport projects.
And finally, do you think, given this report that says we should be prioritising public transport, that a list that's got 7 major road projects versus only 2 public transport projects, that isn't giving priority to public transport and should change?
That's based on what's been brought forward to us from the Victorian government.
No, but it's your initiatives list, Mr. Davies. It's not I understand the priority projects are
you're bordering on seeking...
Excuse me, Chair,
I chair this meeting. You won't excuse me. You're bordering on seeking an opinion of Mr. Davies, and Mr. Davies, you are not obliged to provide opinions. So you might keep that in mind as you answer the Senator's question. Senator Rice.
So the priority projects are what are dependent on the state government, but the initiatives list, as we've clarified, that's your list. It's Infrastructure Australia's list. So perhaps in conclusion, then, so given that's Infrastructure Australia's list, what you expect to see a change in that list so that we get more public transport projects on that list, and what period of time, when are you next reviewing that list to take into account the findings of your report?
So I'll answer the last question first. We review this list on an ongoing basis, so it's live.
So when would you expect to see the recommendations from your report reflected in the in the initiatives list?
I think that'll come through over the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank